There's more to the story with our
After the BBC
podcast.
News.
Listen
Next.
on BBC Sounds.
Drama to get under your skin. Idris Elba is Luther, solving the darkest crimes his way. Watch all episodes, available exclusively on BBC iPlayer. Press red now.
Ready?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, then we best get started.
You two are the worst performing teachers in this school.
I'm not sure I can do it. There's only one way out. It's got to go down.
If we won't stop and we won't stop, then it's a race.
The best spring on TV. Press red to watch now on BBC iPlayer.
The BBC News at 10. And BBC One with Q Edwards.
Tonight at 10, it's called A Survival Guide for Humanity, a major new report on saving the world from climate change. If the catastrophic effects of global warming are to be slowed down, the UN says there will need to be radical reductions in the use of fossil fuels.
Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking.
Yes, we'll have details of the major new report, and we'll be looking at the UK's performance in the quest for zero emissions. Also tonight, President Xi arrives in Moscow, but how will President Putin respond to China's peace plan for Ukraine? It was 20 years ago tonight that Baghdad was under attack. As the American-led invasion got underway, we'll be looking at the tragic legacy.
Iraq sunk into a nightmare. No one knows exactly how many Iraqis were killed. It's in the hundreds of thousands.
And workers have agreed a deal with Network Rail, but pay disputes with the train companies are still not resolved.
And coming up on the BBC
on
News
BBC
channel,
London, as
Fulham's
ULEZ
Alexander
expansion is
Mitrovic
debated in the
charged with
Lords, we
violent
hear
and
from
improper
people on the
conduct
capital's
following his red
borders.
card
Plus,
in the FA
Wisley
Cup
opens its
quarter-final
historic
defeat at
laboratory, the
Manchester
home
United.
of gardening science.
Good evening. The catastrophic impact of climate change and fears for the future of the planet have been laid out in a major new report which the United Nations has described as a survival guide for humanity. Climate experts say that there is a closing window of opportunity to build a sustainable future, but they say that that would involve rapid cuts to the use of fossil fuels and maximising the use of clean energy and technology. Now, the report warns that by the 2030s, the world is likely to miss that key target set to limit the rise in global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But the experts are still stressing that all is not lost and that radical cuts to carbon emissions could still make a difference. And they call for a big increase in clean energy with new technology to remove carbon from the atmosphere. The British government says countries must work towards far more ambitious climate commitments ahead of the UN Climate Summit later this year. Our climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, has this report. Justin, many thanks once again. Justin Rowlatt, our climate editor there in Interlaken. Now, Rishi Sunak has called for countries to work towards far more ambitious climate commitments ahead of the UN Climate Summit, which is called COP28 in November, insisting that the UK is a world leader, he says, in working towards net zero, but there's a need to go further and faster. The government's target is to reduce all greenhouse gas emissions to zero by the year 2035, but how realistic is that? Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, explains. And there's much more information online, including how the extreme weather is connected to climate change. Just head to the website, bbc.co.uk/news, or you can access the same material as well from Rebecca and others on the BBC News app. President Xi of China is on a state visit to Russia, where he was warmly greeted by President Putin. The summit has been the focus of a good deal of speculation following the publication of China's plan to settle the acute crisis in Ukraine, as President Xi put it. Well, Mr. Putin said today that Moscow was always open to negotiation, but the Americans have already warned that the Chinese peace plan could be just a delaying tactic. From Moscow, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg sent this report. Well, let's go live to Beijing then and talk about the Chinese initiative here. Correspondent Stephen McDonnell is there. Stephen, what do you make of this visit and what is President Xi trying to achieve?
Well, publicly at least, Xi Jinping's message to his own people and to the world really is that he has this peace plan for Ukraine. But of course, behind closed doors, when he's speaking to Vladimir Putin, the emphasis could be very different. So instead of saying, pull the troops back in Ukraine, he could just as easily be saying...
Stephen, many thanks once again. Stephen McDonnell, our correspondent in Beijing. Well, rail workers have voted to accept a new offer from Network Rail on pay and jobs and conditions, and it brings to an end the dispute which led to a series of strikes in recent months. The deal will see pay rises for signal workers and maintenance staff, but the agreement does not cover the RMT's dispute with the train operating companies. That's a separate dispute altogether. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin explains. A report into the culture and performance of the Metropolitan Police, which was commissioned after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer, will be published tomorrow, and it is expected to be heavily critical of the force for its failure to tackle a culture that's been widely described as racist, sexist and homophobic. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning is at Scotland Yard tonight. Your thoughts, Lucy, on what's likely to come up tomorrow?
Well, the Casey review has already landed on the desk of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, but tomorrow it will rock the Met. It is expected to be hard-hitting, distressing and disturbing. We understand it will say...
Lucy, many thanks again. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning there, looking ahead to tomorrow's report. 20 years ago tonight, American troops, backed by the British and other allies, invaded Iraq. The decision was hugely controversial, with the US and the UK insisting that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, a claim that turned out not to be true, and declaring that the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein posed a threat to international peace. Well, the invasion took place, and just 6 weeks afterwards, in May of 2003, President Bush declared it was mission accomplished, with an end to major combat operations. What followed, however, was a long period of chaos and violence as the Iraqi insurgency gathered force, becoming a full-blown sectarian war. Well, US and British troops, in fact, spent another 8 years in Iraq. There were 179 losses among British service personnel. Losses on the Iraqi side, both military and civilian, are estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands. Now, when they left, the Americans and the British and other allies, a militant Islamist movement called the Islamic State Group took full advantage of all the political turmoil and the lack of stability which existed in the country. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, looks at the lasting impact of the Iraq War 2 decades on. The tragic legacy of the war in Iraq, 20 years on. That's a special report there by my colleague Jeremy Bowen. Now, in Northern Ireland, hopes of a return to power sharing at Stormont have been dealt a blow following a decision by the Democratic Unionist Party to vote against a key part of the New Deal on trading arrangements following Brexit. The so-called Windsor Framework is meant to reduce the number of checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. It is backed by a majority of politicians at Stormont, but the DUP say that the New Deal doesn't deal with all of their concerns. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy has the latest. Today, well, it's March the 20th. Some of you will know that today is the International Day of Happiness. Others, no doubt, will say, hang on a second, it is the first day of spring, marked by the spring equinox. And before we catch up with the weather, it's a good time, of course, to be enjoying some of the welcome signs of the new season, with flowers like these at the glorious Glendurgan Gardens near Falmouth in Cornwall. More signs of spring today with all of the cherry blossom that's been out at the Royal Horticultural Society garden in Wisley in Surrey. Now, the National Trust says that the recent cold weather has delayed blossoms in many parts of the UK, but the Trust also says that when those temperatures start to rise, we can look forward to what they call a riot of spring colour, like these lovely cherry trees in Shipley in West Yorkshire. And talking of temperatures rising, let's get the expert view and let's join Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Hugh. Well, we had temperatures up to 16 degrees today. That was in Nantwich in Cheshire. So that's one feature of the weather this week. It's been pretty mild so far and more of that to come. It's pretty unsettled. We've got more rain or showers to come really through the rest of this week. It will stay quite mild and quite breezy. Hugh.
Chris, thank you. And thanks for having Llanelli on your end table there, which would be much appreciated. That's all from us. It's time to join all of our colleagues standing by in the nations and regions with the news where you are. But from all of us on the 10 team, thanks for watching and good night.
Thank you, Hugh. Tonight on BBC London, Newlay's expansion and its effect on areas bordering the capital.
Hello there, I'm Paul Scott at the BBC Sports Centre. Now, Fulham striker Alexander Mitrovic is facing a lengthy ban after the Football Association said its standard punishment for his sending off at Manchester United was clearly insufficient.
Good evening to you. It is the subject of much debate in and around the capital. And while the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone to the whole of the capital was being debated in the House of Lords tonight, Charlotte Wright has been hearing from some of those affected on the borders of London.